Story 1. The bride and groom got married, and within 3 months, the bride discovered that the groom was already married and had children in a different country. Story 2. Saw some signs at the wedding, like ignoring each other, making rude and snide remarks publicly, and more. They tried to fix their marriage by having a child earlier than they planned, and that led to divorce. Both are married to different people now and have had more children. By all accounts, they are far more civil, even cordial with each other. Story 3. The maid of honor sat down at our table, downed a shot, and said, "I give them 3 years. Edit. They made it 2 years and 8 months. Story 4. My cousin, who was the bride, was dancing a lot at the reception, so the groom hit her. My uncles gave him a ride to the hospital, which he needed very badly by the time he got there. It was annulled pretty quickly. Story 5. The bride came out to Slipknot. They wrote their own vows, which were, shall we say, overtly and uncomfortably sexual, and they had been dating for a grand total of 2 whole weeks. Any and all attempts to inform them that this was a mistake were met with responses like, "When you know, or you're just jealous. But hey, a free bar is a free bar." Story 6. The wedding was beautiful and the most expensive wedding I have ever been to. The bride worked for a fashion designer in New York City and had 3 different dresses she wore during different parts of the wedding. They announced she was pregnant soon after the wedding, and unfortunately, scans showed there were a few things wrong with the baby. The stress of the situation caused my cousin, the husband, to relapse and go back to his old heroin habit, which apparently she had no idea about. His drug use quickly spiraled and he got fired from his job for stealing, and then his wife found out about it all and moved out to stay with her parents. The baby was born 100% healthy. The scans had gotten it wrong. He tried to quit drugs and make amends to her, but it was rocky and she divorced him before their first anniversary. He disappeared for a few years doing drugs, then got sober and found out he had brain cancer. He relapsed, got sober again, and had his brain tumor removed. Now he is still sober and remarried, has a few kids with his new wife. Story 7. During the reception, the bride's niece accidentally knocked over a drink that splashed the bride's shoes, and she backhanded her in front of everyone. Caused a huge fight, and the groom walked out right then. Story 8. My brother got married to a woman from Russia while he was in the army. The whole family thought she married him for a green card, but he was convinced it was out of love. They had their ceremony in a gazebo on a military base. It was a small gathering of family that traveled to it from out of state. His best friend since high school got ordained just so he could marry them. My brother was really excited. He wore a nice suit, and the bride, well, she showed up in a bright pink tracksuit. They divorced a year later. Story 9. Actually, I performed a wedding at a local bar. We left about 10 p.m. The newlyweds got drunk, started fighting, and were arrested, spending the night in jail. Story 10. I didn't go to the wedding but did go to the bachelorette and goodbye party. We were in college. She was 19, from a super conservative family. Her longtime boyfriend visited her once and was terrible. He wouldn't talk to anyone and basically sulked the whole time. He clearly hated that she was in school. When he proposed, her parents pulled the plug on college tuition because she didn't need it anymore. So, she dropped out at the end of her freshman year, moved back to Central California, and got married to the person who was not kind to her. I never saw her again, but from what I've seen on Facebook, she finally left him in her mid-20s, moved across the country to get away from her family, and was working restaurant jobs while trying to get a degree. We're in our 30s now, and she still seems pretty angry about everything she missed out on and how she was treated, but she's living her life on her own terms. Not a happy ending, but I'm happy for her. Story 11. There was a young lady working with me who was caught texting her boyfriend on her wedding day. She had even sent him a picture of herself in her wedding dress. Story 12. A few weeks later, the bride drove to her parents' house after work instead of her home and said she didn't want to be married anymore and asked them to fix it. Another bride left months later because the groom's drug use had quickly spiraled out of control. Story 13. She was significantly more attractive than my cousin, and she was also much nicer than him. Therefore, she left him. I still don't know why she married him in the first place. She earned more than he did, so it wasn't about looks, personality, or money. Story 14. I went to Singapore to attend a female friend's wedding with a Singaporean guy. She had been so happy up until the actual wedding. My friends and I arrived about 3 days before the ceremony, and the bride was visibly troubled when she met us. We just thought it was nerves and all that. The wedding day comes, and she comes out in her full wedding gown with an absolute scowl, like she was about to murder someone kind of expression. I'm not even kidding. She never smiled once during the whole ceremony and the dinner. She loosened up a bit in the after party, and my girlfriend went and asked if she was okay. She waved my girlfriend away. Right after the wedding, she went back to Hong Kong for work, claiming there was work she needed to do. Then the pandemic hit, and we were practically not allowed to travel anywhere for a year or two. We were worried about her marriage, but she was always rather evasive, not answering our questions or just changing the topic whenever we talked about it. Our circle of friends learned not to ask about it anymore. Fast forward 5 years until now, it turns out that she never actually got married. The ceremony and everything was for show. We gathered that the guy probably had another girlfriend in Singapore, and she only found out right before the wedding. But then, she never said it out loud, only hinted at it here or there with some close friends of hers. It's unreal. 6 or 7 of us, with a 4-year-old kid, flew to Singapore just to witness the show of a wedding. Story 15. The groom went missing between the ceremony and reception. The bride found him engaging in an intimate act with the best man in the toilets. Subsequently, she smashed a glass in his face. Story 16. I will start. The bride and groom got married at 20, and the bride's dad asked her to return his credit card during his speech because she can't use daddy's money now that she's married. He then ran over and started cutting his own credit card while the DJ played Rich Girl. Story 17. I was going to be the best man at a friend's wedding. We got together the evening before the wedding, and all seemed well. Then, at 7:30 the next morning, I got a phone call from my friend. He said that the wedding was called off, and he would call and explain later. He didn't. It was 2 weeks later when I finally got a hold of his dad, and he said that his son was away at boot camp and wouldn't be coming back. I never heard from him or the bride again, so I don't really know what happened. Story 18. I'm not sure, but the thank you card for my gift arrived on the day I found out they were divorced, 2 weeks at most. Story 19. My good friend and college roommate got married to his high school sweetheart as he was working through grad school. It was a beautiful wedding, but a few of us noticed the lack of enthusiasm on the face of the bride. Fast forward to the honeymoon, and he had planned fun little couples excursions for each day of the trip. She wouldn't go on any of them and insisted on staying in the room reading books. After the 3rd day of her staying in, he went to the pool bar and chatted with the bartender and other guests for a few hours before returning to the room. She accused him of drunkenly knocking her over during an attempted hug, followed by her ranting through tears about how she should never have married him. She booked an early flight home, and the annulment was already underway by the time he returned 2 days later. Turns out, she had been voicing her concerns about getting married for months before the big day, and her father or family and my buddy had persuaded her to go through with it. Her initial story upon returning was that he had thrown her down, but within a week, she had come clean that it was definitely an accident, which we all knew because my friend is one of the kindest and gentlest people I know. He's remarried to a lovely woman and has a young daughter, and his ex is traveling the world. The moral of the story is not to marry someone who clearly doesn't want to get married. Story 20. She had a baby she never bonded with. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and hospitalized for months. When she was released, he went to court to get an order mandating that she only be allowed to see her child with another adult present. They mutually decided at that point to end the marriage. He now has full custody of the child, and she has limited visitation rights. Sad story. Story 21. Bridezilla snapped at the groom's mother and then yelled at the groom when he told her not to speak disrespectfully to his mother. Story 22. The wedding was fine, but afterwards the groom got a job that required him to relocate, and the bride would move over a bit later. However, the bride, who frequently consumed alcohol to an unhealthy extent, was already expressing distrust because the groom had a few female colleagues. She insisted on meeting them upon her arrival, demonstrating unreasonable jealousy despite the groom being a decent and loyal person. As the time for her to move closer approached, I overheard her, already inebriated again, speaking negatively about her husband to her friend over the phone. She was often quick to mention she would divorce him for almost any reason. Eventually, she moved in with him at their new place, but not long after, they got divorced. It was revealed she had been unfaithful with her driver during her work-related travels. The marriage didn't last even a few months. Story 23. The groom met a girl, fell hard in love, and pressed the girl to marry quickly, saying she was the love of his life. 3 months after they married, he left her, engaging in victim blaming and gaslighting throughout. He omits the part where he emotionally crushed her with phrases like, "I'm just kidding," and "you know what I mean." He didn't really leave her after 3 months of marriage. He returned, then left for some other reason, then came back and left again for yet another reason. This cycle continued for months, and the wife never even realized there were ongoing problems. He destroyed that girl. I hope she finds someone who doesn't use love as a weapon against her. Story 24. The relationship between the bride's father and the groom was contentious from before the wedding. At it, one of the bride's cousins plus one had a dress with a cleavage, and one of the groom's cousins, drunk beyond measure, came to her and told her he wanted verbatim to suck her breasts. The plus one tells her date, who promptly punches the groom's cousin. This begins a full-on family versus family brawl that culminates with the groom punching the bride's father, and this man taking his daughter away and keeping her away from her husband for 10 days. It got annulled. Can't imagine why. Story 25. My cousin got married pretty early into a relationship in her early 20s. It was a very simple wedding as not much could be afforded. They had the groom's 12-year-old cousin be the photographer because I was a bridesmaid. When cutting the cake, my cousin fed the piece of cake to her new husband and did the usual little show but didn't make that big of a mess. It was his turn. He absolutely tried to smash it into my cousin's face. They got divorced. I can't remember how long after the wedding that was, but maybe at least a year later? Now she's remarried and seems very happy. They're on holiday right now. I'll be able to meet him in roughly 2 months. Story 26. They were both 35, a successful lawyer and doctor, but had never spent the night at each other's house. After the marriage, they couldn't agree on who would move in with whom and filed for divorce after 3 months. No one knows why they even got married at all. I guess they felt like they were supposed to at that age. Story 27. Wife got pregnant unexpectedly. Her rich family reacted strongly, utilizing all their connections to organize a $100,000 wedding and reception within a few weeks. Wife had a miscarriage after 6 months. A year later, they were divorced and their marriage annulled. Neither the wife nor the husband really wanted to marry, but they succumbed to pressure from their pro-life family. I think they would have tried to make it work had they had the child, but once that possibility was removed, the marriage ended quite quickly. Story 28. One of my best friends got married. None of us had met her before, but we hadn't seen him in years and were super excited to reconnect. This was the most elaborate wedding I had ever been to. Tuxedos, an incredible meal, a hall that resembled Hogwarts, an opera performance, and a string quartet playing his favorite rap songs. It was incredible, yet we just knew it wasn't him. We started to mingle with her friends at a table, and we soon learned they didn't really know her. We brushed it off as we just wanted to be there for him and have a good time. That was until the mother of the bride made a harmless joke about the bride being difficult as a child. This led to the bride eventually storming off after the dances, locking herself in a room, getting blackout drunk, and berating him, his family, and many guests who had flown across the country to be there. It all started to click that she was just absolutely psychotic. Most of the guests caught the vibe and left by 9:30 p.m. My friends and I eventually sat with her friends and shut down the party, from 150 guests down to 8. Why would we let everything go to waste? He quickly came over after he was able to calm her down and apologized to us and left. We honestly thought we'd never see him again. 6 weeks later, he called me. He had returned home. They were done. The story just has so many layers to it. Looking back, in the one day we had been around the situation, there were so many red flags. Thankfully, we have him back and he's thriving. Story 29. The wedding was excessive, just overly explicit and superficial. She became pregnant less than a year later. He blamed her and was violently abusive towards her. She offered to terminate the pregnancy, but he is against abortion, which angered him further, leading to her hospitalization again. They had been engaging in unprotected intimacy since their wedding, and it was common knowledge, making him the only person shocked by the pregnancy. They separated after the instances of violence, but didn't officially divorce until she had 3 more children, believing the cost of divorce was unaffordable. In reality, they had no assets or joint debt, so a do-it-yourself divorce was possible, but neither possessed the insight to realize that. He has not voluntarily contributed any child support. Enforcement has been through the collection of his tax returns, directed to her. He has never met his son, who harbors strong feelings of dislike towards him.